You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima. Good morning, Allison. How has your week been going?
Oh, not terrible.
That's great.
It's good. Great. It's good. Something to follow up from last time when we talked about burnout, and I mentioned that I started therapy, and I was talking about great that's been going, and the EMDR and all this stuff. So proud of myself for doing this. And to sort of as a lovely tie-in to the last two episodes, now we're having crazy insurance issues around the therapy.
Oh,
I know.
Sorry.
I know. So when I had found this therapist, I said, you take this plan, right? Yep, sure do. Great. So I began.
Yeah.
And I'm 3 sessions in, and I got an email the other day that was like, you owe us $610. How would you like to pay that?
Oh, boy.
And I was like, wait, what? I said, I thought this was covered. That doesn't sound like covered.
No.
And she said, well, I looked it up, and it looks like you have to pay out of pocket until you meet your deductible, which is $2,800. And so then I looked it up, and it said the first 3 sessions, you only have to pay a $30 copay. And then I asked her, and she said, oh, apparently there's a wrinkle where that's only if you go to these therapists and da-da-da-da. So it's even if I do find one of those, I get the first 3 sessions for $30. Then I have to meet the $2,800 copay. Then after that, every session, I still have to pay 30%. This makes me so mad for so many reasons. But it's
you're doing a thing to for you.
Yes.
And that can't even be uncomplicated or easy.
Exactly. And it makes me so mad about the mental health system. That when I was talking to the therapist who was trying really hard to how can we give you a discount? How can we make this work? Do you want to pay out of pocket? None of these options are great.
Yeah.
And then I said, well, it is time right now to choose next year's plan. So maybe I should think about that. She said, well, yeah. So if next year feels like it's going to be one where you have a lot of mental health needs, I want to be okay, number one, we all always have mental health needs.
Yes.
Always.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, I'm a caregiver. Therefore, I'm going to have these needs.
Yes.
Number 3, how does anybody know what next year's going to look like?
Right.
So it should just be.
You don't plan out your mental health needs a year in advance?
I mean, I'm a planner, but I haven't gotten to that place yet.
Okay.
But the sad thing is, in a way, I kind of had, right? I was I'm in this new phase of my life where I have more time and space, and I'm going to really just do the work.
Yeah.
Do the work I haven't done. So in a way, I was kind of going to do it.
Yeah, right.
And now I just don't even know what to do. I mean, I have to figure out a way to pay the bill for the 3 sessions.
Yeah.
But now I have to make this really hard decision about, do I pay $100 out of pocket every single time?
Right.
And then that doesn't go towards the deductible. Do I stop going to therapy? And then Maya, same thing. I emailed her therapist and I was like, are you going to tell me the same thing? She's like, oh, let me look. So I'm sure we're going to get the same thing from her in a second. And it's just we're trying to do this good thing.
Yeah.
And this is, insurance itself makes me so mad, but just about the mental health piece, it's oh.
Yeah, that's so frustrating.
So frustrating. So frustrating. So I still want to say that, yes, everyone should be in therapy and it's super helpful. And I just want to say the system needs to work. The system needs to work to make it easier. And I think what you said too about I'm trying to do something good for myself. And now even that's creating adding to the list of phone calls I need to make each week,
Yep.
So that happened this week.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And that was not good. We also got, and I think I'll just tell this quick because I think this happens too often. We got a bill from the hospital, Sean's hospitalization in Indiana. And we had looked up the plan, and our plan said it covers all the states. So we're great. Yeah. And then the bill was $3,000. And I called them and said, what's the deal? And they said, oh, we just hadn't written down the name of your plan. So we couldn't run it because we hadn't written down the name. So if you just give us the name, we can run it through. And I was like, so what about this bill? They're like, oh, you can just disregard the bill. So if I had just been, I wish people could see your face. You've been making a lot of amazing faces in the last 2 minutes.
Thank you.
A lot of eye rolling and exasperation.
Right.
But if I had just been the bill paying citizen, who had just been well, the bill says I have to pay $3,000 and had done it, I'm sure they would have just taken the money. Like they wouldn't have like,
Right.
They were not going to call me to be like, oh, we need the name of your plan. They just sent me the bill. I know. This is why caregivers need therapy.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with these broken
Right.
systems.
We can't you have to question every bill that comes because it might not even be real. Wow.
Right. I have to give a shout out, speaking of mail, to our mail carrier who I saw this morning and is a big fan of the podcast. Said he's all caught up. And then he said that after he listened to the Medicare episode, now he feels really bad every time he puts bills into my mail slot. Yeah. I told him he could just keep them and pay them if he'd like.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, he said that every time he sees one, he's like, doesn't even want to put it in the door. But I'm glad he listens.
Yeah, we are very glad.
Yes. So anyway, that's my week. How about you? How's your week going?
It's been kind of a drag. It's just feeling, as we talked about last week, burnout. I've been feeling burned out. I've been feeling tired and worn down and just not a lot of energy, not a lot of like motivation to do stuff. Also like feeling really anxious. And it's like, as we talked about, there's a lot of things feeding into that, I think. I think, the obvious, like being a caregiver, the pandemic.
Yep.
But then it's things like we're in that point where it really is feeling like the days are getting short and the darkness is coming on real quick in the evening, and like the rains are really setting in, and taking Mosey out for a walk at night in the rain isn't always something that I'm really excited to do, and I'm trying to like, it's hard, but like little things like that to try to not let that be such a like thing that feels like just too much. Like it's manageable. Like we have umbrellas. Right. And I know that for whatever like reason, people in the Pacific Northwest like are umbrella averse, but like I'm trying to break that and like
use an umbrella.
Use an umbrella and it can be fine. So it's just, all the little things stacking up.
Do you find yourself, are you a person who is impacted by like seasonal affective disorder? You know what I mean? Like sad, like when it's dark and all that?
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. And that's kind of what I feel coming on.
Yeah.
And I know daylight savings time is coming, and I can never remember which way it moves things, but it's either going to be darker or later in the morning or darker earlier at night. Either one of those isn't great.
Neither is good.
So
I think it gets dark at like 3 p.m.
Yeah. Right. And I have one of those like sad lights, but it's in my office.
It's at your like work office.
At my work office, which I haven't been at for, well over a year. So at some point I should probably swing in there and pick that up. And
yeah. Do you find that helps?
I don't know. But it's one of those things where it feels helpful enough to like, this is a thing that I can do that is potentially is benefiting it. So I'm doing something.
Sure. Yeah. And I have one too. We have a good friend who was in Florida, moved here to Minnesota for a couple of years, and then eventually was like, I can't take this Minnesota thing, and moved back to Florida. And while she was here, she got a sad lamp. And then when she left, she's like, I don't need this anymore. I'm going to a place where the sun actually shines. So she gave it to me, and I pull it out in the winter as well. Yeah. And I mean, it's hard to tell, like if it works, although I have noticed if I leave it on for a long time, like too long, I almost get like a little like hyper.
Okay.
Which tells me that it is working.
It is
in some way.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably time for me to pull mine out too. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that sounds like just compounding things.
Yeah. So I think even one of the ways that like the anxiety and everything was kind of stacking up is like, we're recording today and it's like, what are we going to talk about? Because I don't know. We've done a lot of episodes, and it's like, I don't know. I think I'm just in a like mentally burned out kind of space where it's hard to kind of, it feels like new ideas coming up with that is difficult right now.
Right.
And so I was kind of like, what are we going to talk about? And then I saw the other day you shared a piece online about you and Sean kind of like traveling through an airport and all of the like things that are happening there that people are unaware of, that they don't see what you're facing, why, the physical things you're carrying, the emotional and mental things you're carrying through that experience. And it's also, I think this week is Invisible Illness Awareness Week or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I suggested, hey, we could talk about, what is it like to be a caregiver for someone with an invisible illness?
Yeah.
Sarah,
love it.
Her illnesses are that way very much. And you were very much like, this is a great idea.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so we've got something. And then my mind is still blank. And so I'm just trusting that between the two of us,
I'm here for you. Yep.
You've got things to talk about. That's why there's two people here, so that we can kind of help the other out when we're struggling like this.
Can you imagine? It's like, I suppose people do have a one-person podcast, but that's
I can't imagine.
Just like
no
staring off into
too much pressure,
nothingness, right?
So,
well, I'm really good at talking.
Okay,
so I'll just talk and then ask you some questions. We'll go from there, because I never want this podcast to be something that adds to your anxiousness or your life, because this should be good times together.
And it is. Yeah.
Well, thank you for reading that piece. So the piece I wrote is called Invisible Traveler. And it's funny when you say Sean and I were in an airport, because that was not recent, by the way.
Right.
I wrote this a while ago. And it just was a piece about because, Sean, when I describe all the things that have happened to him, and I say he's missing half his tongue, and he's, missing his bladder, and he's had 150 skin cancers. I always wonder what people are picturing.
Right.
When they hear that. And then they meet him, and you would have no idea.
Yeah.
You have no idea. I mean, he talks fine, and he looks great and all the things. I mean, I always say he looks like a guy who could maybe use a nap and a good sandwich. But don't we all? Really?
Right. Yes.
So you would have no idea.
Yeah.
That, especially now. So sometimes, he until recently had a PICC line in, and sometimes we would take a walk and he would have a short sleeve shirt on, and then that would be hanging out. You know what I mean? You could see people be like, oh, but otherwise, it's usually under the skin, the urostomy's under the clothes, all the things.
Yeah.
So you have no idea. So he's got all this stuff going on. He's got a completely broken hip, kidney disease, all the things.
Yeah.
But you can't tell.
Right.
And so I know that in my 11 years of caregiving, in some ways, so certainly I don't want him to be sicker. I certainly don't want him to need a walker or a wheelchair, or, in certain moments he has, but I don't want it to be visible, meaning that it's worse, right, than it is right now. And he just looks like a 42-year-old guy. And so sometimes that makes it even harder for me, because the needs that he has are not obvious.
Right.
And so one thing, in that piece, we talk about the airport. And so this happens, back when we would travel a lot, where he really needs that golf cart.
Yeah.
And to flag down the golf cart, I always feel a little people are like, really? Are you just late? Did you just not get here early enough? Why do you people need the golf cart? But he really does.
Yeah.
And he feels weird about it. And then he doesn't want to do it. And then, then I'm like, oh, but this is not good, So I feel like there are moments like that, or even at the airport, there's a tram, train thingy. And it says please give up there's only a couple seats.
Right.
Please give up your seat for people with mobility issues. If he was sitting there, people would be like, dude, what are you doing? But really, he has a broken hip, So it's moments like that we're in this situation where it's, I don't want to say it's ego, but it's he and I both are ooh, we need this service. But people are going to look at us weird if we use this service. And do we want to deal with that? Or do we just say, forget them? But then, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is there, Sarah, same, right? When you look at her on paper, there's all kinds of stuff. But if somebody had never met her and just walked into your house and she's just sitting there, is there anything visibly about her that would tell a person that she's got all kinds of stuff going on?
Yeah. I mean, most of the time not, particularly if she's out. If we're out of the house somewhere, she, one, happens to have the energy to expend on that. Yep. Or she's her adrenaline is going. And so, whereas if you were to come here, there are times when she would be, it might be obvious that she's extremely fatigued. And that would be the sign.
Yeah.
But other than that, no, with the exception of from time to time, she uses them, only when she needs them, but her mobility aids. And so whether that's, she has those forearm crutches that she uses sometimes.
Okay.
Or a walker or, if things are really rough, a wheelchair sometimes. And so, like, depending on how she's doing, that might be something that makes it more apparent that there's something going on with her. And, one example of kind of how that impacts day to day being out in the world is, I was talking to her as part of like, what am I going to talk about this? I was like, bouncing ideas off of her because, this is our shared experience.
Yeah.
And, she brought up that, if she's at the doctor's office and the nurse is leading us back to the exam room, if she doesn't have any of her mobility aids, it's often like hard to keep up.
Yeah.
Or it's like, it's like, hey, you slow down a little bit.
Right.
Because there's not that like hint that like, okay, it's harder for her walking is not easy.
Yes.
She doesn't have the stamina. And so, whereas if she has her mobility aids, then they're much more like accommodating and like, okay, let's take our time kind of situation.
Right. Yes. I hear that 100%. I think even that when there's a semi-busy street near us, and when we are like walking the dog and we're trying to cross the street, the dog and I are like, and just like cruise across. But Sean is like, I cannot go that fast. Right. So he's like walking really slowly across the street with all this traffic stopped. And sometimes and maybe I just need like a thicker skin and just to say like, forget y'all. Right. And to not worry about it. But sometimes I am like, are the people in the cars like, come on, why is this guy like taking his time going across the street? You know what I mean? Where I just want to be like, he can't go any faster, So I totally hear that. And same thing, I can picture like so many moments of us, same thing, like the nurse just like cruising down the hallway and us being like, can you just slow down? It's interesting because I wonder, I still want to get Sarah and Sean here so we can hear their perspectives on things. Sure. But for them, or even for us, like, is it because I could see in some ways like they're both young people, might not love walking around with mobility aids either.
Yeah.
So I kind of wonder like which is harder, right? Like being there and being like, I'm a 40-something-year-old with a walker versus, at least if I have the walker, everybody knows that I have this extra need. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I don't know for sure what her perspective is 100% on that. I know she mentioned that like, and it's similar. If she's using a mobility aid, often like people seem more aware or seem more like nice or just kind of like willing to accommodate or aware, I guess.
Right.
Which can be helpful when she's trying to navigate the world.
Yeah. So we also have a disabled parking sticker because of Sean's hip.
Right.
And so even like last night, we got invited to a brewery for somebody's wedding reception. And we, it was like the parking was packed and it was like, well, if here's a disabled parking spot that we can access. But you just feel a little weird because then like people see us, they see the blue sticker, and then I think when they see us hop out of the car, that's not what they're expecting. Right. And so sometimes we get dirty looks like, did you like steal that from your parents? Or like, you know what I mean? Like you can just tell that people are like, you shouldn't have that sticker.
Right.
And so that always feels challenging as well, that I just want to be like, it's for him and he really needs it, Right.
Yeah. And so much of this like funnels back to the like lack of understanding or awareness of society at large for like illness and disability.
Yes.
That like if someone has a invisible illness or invisible disability, like the presumption is that they appear able-bodied.
Right.
And so you expect that everyone who appears that way like is.
Right.
Whereas like it's not, I would probably in more times than not, it's not apparent like what, is going on with somebody, and that like we need to have a lot more like compassion and grace and understanding for, the people around us.
For sure.
To not be making those assumptions. And unfortunately, that's not the society we're in right now.
Right.
But
that's a good point, because you think about how many illnesses are visible. Not that many. Right. And so if you think about like someone who has gone through cancer treatment, perhaps they're wearing a headscarf or a hat or that kind of thing. But even like for us, it used to be the mask, actually. Like the mask used to be sort of a signal.
Right.
to people that like, okay, this guy's got something going on.
Mm-hmm.
And now certainly that's really different.
Mm-hmm.
So also at this event last night, it was a big deal for us to even like be in an event in general, but then it also was inside and all the stuff. So of course we had our masks on and we were like the only people. Mm. But you could tell some people who sort of knew us or knew our story, as they came up to us, would then put their mask on. And so in a way, the mask itself was also a little bit of a signal of like, okay, this guy needs it. I mean, it should just be a signal for everybody right now. But that's a different story. But I think it was sort of like, okay, this guy needs extra protection. And so when we go talk to him, we're going to put this mask on. So the mask was a little bit of a symbol just for people who kind of knew us. I think otherwise people could just be like, you know, that's a whole different conversation, but how people feel about mask wearing. But I think that pre-COVID, him wearing a mask was another sort of signal of like something's up, something's going on. Yeah. Yeah. Are there things that like sometimes I find, and this is probably a gender thing. Okay. But I find that there are things like, let's say we go to the garden store, right? And that I'm the one like hauling the big old bags of mulch. And Sean, and I'm like, you are not picking up these bags. Right. You can just walk to the car. Yeah. And sometimes I think that people, again, I'm probably just projecting and maybe people are thinking nothing. Yeah. But that people might be like, why is that lump of a guy just like not helping his wife and he's just walking to the car and she's carrying all the heavy stuff? You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think something that I'm realizing as I'm talking is just sort of the like how much I carry around about people's perceptions. That the harder piece, the reason that the invisible illness makes it harder is not because it like the seat on the bus isn't there or I can't carry the bag. It's more like me thinking about what other people are thinking about our situation, which is an interesting insight that I hadn't realized until I kept saying these different things over and over again.
And to add, like, that's a whole nother like ball in the air. Yeah. Like mental thing to be like considering that we don't, that's just extra and not really adding to our mental health and well-being and feeling balanced and all of that. Yeah. And another thing that has been challenging with Sarah being sick in this way is initially, like, as she was getting sicker, because it wasn't a quote unquote visible thing or familiar thing, like there were people who like questioned how sick she really was, kind of situation. And so like after those experiences, part of living with her having this like invisible illness or invisible illnesses is like feeling more protective or more guarded with like what information we do choose to share. Because if like we share that we went out and did something that, let's say we share that we went out and, you know, we had dinner at a restaurant or whatever, you know, there are people who are going to take that to mean that she's getting better or as a reflection on like, with the trend of her illness. And that's not necessarily what that means. It could mean that, you know, on that day, it felt just worth the sacrifice of the fatigue that will come to go do a quote unquote normal thing. But just then also it just the added like, feeling like you can't share everything freely or just feeling a little more, protective of the details of your partner's life because of how that's going to be perceived potentially.
Totally. I think about at so many of Sean's doctor's appointments, they say things like, have you been able to get out for a walk? How far can you walk? Can you take a walk? You know, which I'm, you know, glad they do that. But sometimes it's like, yes, but I also want them to know that like, yes. And sometimes we make it like half a block and then we turn around. Or there are times that I've had to like go get the car and pick him up or do you know what I mean? And so you're right that it's like, it's a hard balance because you want to like celebrate the good moments, but also make clear to people that the good moments don't mean that, you know, they're only good moments. Yeah. Something I'm thinking about when you said the thing about like, if you guys got to go to a restaurant, like, I guess a bonus of it being invisible is that there are times that you two can just go out and be like, look at us. Like nobody does know that this is another piece, which do you feel like in those moments, are you ever able to just be like, we're just a couple and here we are having dinner? Or is your caregiver hat always on that you're like, okay, we're a couple having dinner and is she getting too tired? Should we go home? Is the drive going to, you know what I mean?
I think it is that the part of the brain that is constantly monitoring and watching for those signs of like we've been here too long and like the adrenaline's running out or those kind of things, that is a hard part to turn off.
Yeah.
But I also like, there are the fact that it is something that is, an invisible illness that we can be somewhere, and that feeling of like no one knows what's going on, that we can kind of just feel like, a normal couple doing a normal thing. Yeah, I think that, I don't know that I'd thought of that before, but I can see that that's been there on some level. It depends.
I mean, I'm not trying to bright side it, but I was just thinking about that piece, that in some ways, like if she, let's say she always had a mobility aid, then that would always be a thing, right? That would always be part of it. Whereas sometimes you could just say, like, it's just us and,
Right. And I don't want to also, like, I don't know the experience of caring for someone with a very visible illness or, someone who is disabled in that way. And so I don't want to be like, this is better, or like, I'm glad it's not that, or because I don't, there's their own challenges there, and it's its own experience. And I can, I'm talking to what I know with me and Sarah, and that's all I can do, I guess.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. As a side note with that, I wanted to just throw out real quick to listeners. I know that, you and I just come from like you said, like we have our two experiences and that's it. And so if there are people out there listening who are like, you know what, I would love to hear more about or have somebody come on and talk about is this topic or this perspective or an expert on this or that kind of thing, just reach out to us because we're very much aware that you and I, I think that we are in a niche market and that like people aren't talking much about young spousal caregivers, which I'm glad that we are.
Yeah.
And we know that there's so many different angles and different situations. And so I just want to say to listeners that if there's something that you think would be interesting for us to talk about or have other people on to cover, just to reach out to us on Instagram or the email address or, whatever works best for you, because we are definitely open to hearing those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else haven't we covered around this topic of caring for someone with an invisible illness?
I mean, one thing that I think stands out, and this stood out reading that piece that you had written, is like, one, it's about how the people around, that have no idea of Sean's illness, what he's going through, his condition, but also equally like then no idea about you as a caregiver and like all that you're carrying in regards to that. And so like I can relate to being out and knowing that, no one knows how sick Sarah is.
Right.
And no one knows that I'm there supporting her and on alert, watching for all of the signs of, we need to move on or, and my attention is split between, enjoying whatever experience we're at in that. And it's already difficult as a caregiver feeling unseen. And it's just kind of like in those situations, it can feel like extra invisible as a caregiver.
Yeah. That's such a good point. Such a good point. It's making me think too of, I think I keep thinking back to this airport situation, but there was one time when by the time we got on the plane hadn't yet taken off and he was just like not well. And I remember thinking like, we need to get him some water. We need to get something. And I were hitting the little, flight attendant button. And even when she came, I was just like, my husband just fell. Like we need some water or something. And even like that, it's just like, you feel like everything, every need, and certainly the other people on the airplanes who need water, but you know what I mean? Like, I just wanted to be like, he's special.
Right. Yeah.
You can't see it, but it's a big deal that he doesn't feel well right now,
And so you have to feel like you have to extra advocate kind of.
Extra advocate. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because even like the fact that he, like at this exact moment, as far as we know, like there is no active cancer.
Right.
But I feel like if we said, like at the party last night, people have been like, why do you have your masks on? It's like, I say like, Fanconi anemia, immune. You know what I mean? There isn't even like a great quick answer that people understand.
Yeah.
Which makes it more complicated. It's like, well, so my husband has all this stuff and he's complicated, therefore. And so, yeah, I think you're right that it's like already hard to, like, people don't see caregivers, but they definitely don't see us when the person we're caring for in that moment looks, appears to the outside world as if like there's nothing extra going on here.
Yeah.
And so then our load is even heavier because it's not recognized and acknowledged. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad I had not heard that there was this like invisible illness week. And I'm glad that exists. I mean, there seems to be like a day or a week for everything, and I would love to hear the perspective of the people with the invisible illness as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to keep in mind and consider the like challenge our conceptions, of what, people who are sick appear to be. And I think that goes for everybody to just, we don't know what somebody's dealing with on any given day.
Yeah.
And like the more we can just assume that someone is, needs what they're asking for, or like, I think that's the better way to err.
Yeah.
When going through
it's all about the negative space that I always talk about, right?
Yeah,
like we don't know what's going on in somebody's negative space.
Exactly.
So we don't know if someone's there sitting as a caregiver. We don't know if someone's sitting there feeling unwell. We don't know those things. And so how can we just treat everyone with love and grace and support and not judge, like, do you really need that spot? Do you really need to walk that slow? Do you really need, you know what I mean? Like just everybody's got a lot going on. And so how can we just show love in all of those ways?
Exactly.
I want to let people in a little thing that happened behind the scenes because I think it's a good learning opportunity, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And that is that I started to talk about us having a handicap sticker. And that you told me that that's not the best way to talk about that. And I just wanted to sort of put that, I think that's a really good teachable moment for other people to hear as well.
Yeah.
And so that was, the way I had always talked about that blue sticker that we have hanging in our car. And so I just want to say, so you educated me today and said that, you think it's, what was the language you think is more appropriate?
Disabled parking sticker. Or
Yeah. And so, and even I heard you say today, like mobility aids. And so I think, I think the language is one way that we can just show people respect as well. So I'm just super grateful that you stopped me and, educated me in that moment. Because I think there's so much in our language that we've just always used these words and don't think about it. Right.
Right.
With that, I want to say that, if anybody ever hears us using any language that you're like, that's not respectful. That's not the term that is the most respectful, to let us know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we're all learning. And I think that like we're deep into some aspects, right? And I think even about like when we talked that 1 week about chronic fatigue and how to not call it just chronic fatigue, but to call it chronic fatigue syndrome and the difference there. So anyway, just wanted to say that I am grateful that I learned that today. And I'm glad that you took the time to tell me that, because I think that's one way that we can show love to people. Love and respect is by trying to learn and use the proper terms. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. So by the time this episode airs, it will be November. And November is Caregiver Appreciation, Awareness, Love. Let's show something to caregivers month, which should be every month.
Right.
But
we'll take it.
Officially, it is in November.
Yes.
So a couple things we wanted to mention. One is that we're going to do another giveaway in November. And so I've talked in the past about, I have these negative space boxes for caregivers called I'm Part of the Story. They have recently been upgraded to include 3 essential oil sticks. They're like little pocket-sized guys that you that are like medical grade and are used often by hospitals, and like the VA uses them. But I think they can be really supportive of caregivers to have in your purse or your pocket. One is Calm, one is Comfort, and one is Citrus, which is for energy. And so those have been added to the boxes. And so as our giveaway, we're going to do a box plus. So a box plus a lot of other cool items.
Cool items, yeah.
So if you're interested in entering for yourself or for a caregiver in your life, you can find the registration form on the link in our bio on Instagram or on Facebook or at the website.
Right. And probably in the show notes for this show as well.
Yes.
And if you are listening to this and you're like, I don't know a caregiver in my life, to enter in this. I bet you do.
Yes,
and
you sure
so
do.
I would challenge you to do a little digging and find one, because I'm sure that you do know someone who is
Yes.
fulfilling some sort of caregiving role.
Agreed.
And so do a little looking.
It's true. So enter the giveaway either for yourself, caregivers. I love it when caregivers themselves are like, "What? Can I get the?" Yes, you can. Yes, or for someone else. And then the other thing I want to mention is that I have started doing caregiver coaching. And so, in my previous life, I was a coach and a coach of coaches. For 15 years, and have now transitioned that into. I'm sorry. There's a cat. You can run up. You can hear. There's some cat aerobics going on in the background over here. I apologize for that. Anyway, I am doing caregiver coaching, which means that I'm offering one-on-one sessions for caregivers. And so taking my 15 years of experience as a coach and my 11 years of experience as a caregiver and combining those two things. And so I am not a licensed social worker and don't pretend to be. But the people I have been coaching are people who have therapists separately. But what they're finding from this experience is that they have this like designated time and space to talk to somebody who really gets it. And they're finding that their therapists are great and for certain things, but that they don't often understand the caregiving experience. And so, so it's a safe place where you as a caregiver can, share what's going on. I'm not going to bright side you. I'm only going to problem solve if that's something you're interested in. And so that's something that I am now offering through Negative Space. And so if you're interested in that, you can contact me at Allison@thenegativespace.life via email or Instagram or Facebook or wherever you want to find me. And we can get into more details about that. But just wanted to offer that service to our caregiver listeners.
No, that's great. And it's wonderful that you're doing that and sharing all that you've learned and experienced through the years. So yeah,
for sure. Could also be a good Christmas present or holiday gift if you want to give somebody the gift of coaching or the gift of a caregiver box for the upcoming holiday. So yeah. Good. Well, my friend, I hope that some of the things going on, the unsettledness starts to settle a little bit, and that you find your sad lamp, and that brings a little brightness to your days.
Right. Get through this, get through the winter.
Oof, we've only just begun.
Well,
but we'll get through it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
Yeah, it's good talking.
Yeah, good talking to you too. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you later.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.